Welcome to Think Fast, where Suchita has finally left the country. She's fled the country because people couldn't take her shit anymore. She's gone to America to meet the Trump. She's hanging in Mar-a-Lago with Trump himself, and she'll come back with many stories about how he's such a cool homie and how she made him learn how to say "yes, sister," which I still can't say. But in her place, we don't have Trump, but we have Amit Doshi, who's subbing in for her, a better version of a co-host than Trump would be. But Amit, welcome to Think Fast. Finally, you're
Thank you,
subbing for
thank you.
Sushita and not for me.
That is true, man. What can I do? You go and sit in gardens and like drink wine under trees, and she goes to beaches with Trump in the background. I mean, like all fun stuff, I guess.
Yeah, but at least I'm not saying that she's going to get liposuction, because if Suchita gets liposuction,
She
she will
will
be
cease to
non-existent.
exist. Yeah, not happening
Non-existent.
anymore.
But yes, okay. What are we talking about this week? What are we talking about this week?
uh,
So
you,
I
leave it to you.
I'm actually sorry. This is what happens when
Yes.
you start off an
Well,
extra. You go.
okay. I shall go. What should we talk about first this week? I think we should talk about the great resignation continuation that seems to be never ending, that we keep
Yeah,
hearing more and more different things about.
yeah,
This time, I think quiet quitting is the phrase of the day.
yes. There's also
Uh,
quiet firing, which has become a term that people are using a lot more.
which is I had not heard that term. I had not even honestly,
I
quiet quitting is something that I heard for the first time this week, and it's everywhere now. I'd never
And
heard
now
it before.
quiet firing has just started off. It's literally an article which I read today morning before we're recording this, and I was like, okay, this is like the other side of it. So it's interesting. I'm like, I feel in many ways these terms are. I mean, this stuff has always happened. It's just a different way to kind of put it out there, I guess, for different
Mhm.
times. We're also going to dig into fake cloud kitchens, which is super interesting to kind of look at that entire space of things.
Yeah.
And we can't have you on the show and not talk about podcasts. So YouTube
Yes, of
launches
course.
their podcast hub in the US, is testing it out. What else
Mhm.
has happened? Like what's in the base level news of the week? Did you read this? Twitter's testing an edit button. They finally talking about it.
I saw that. You know what? I've always been on Twitter's side over here. I know that prolific tweeters want that edit button,
Yeah.
but I've always thought that Twitter is best when it doesn't have an edit button.
Yeah.
I heard a really interesting. So Louis C.K. was on Joe Rogan recently,
Mm,
and he
mm,
said something really interesting, which he got from somebody else. But I thought it was a really interesting kind of point of this, right? That basically Twitter is just talking, but it's talking and it's saved, right?
yeah.
And that actually is how most people use Twitter. It's just saying something. So when you just say something, sometimes you're not particularly polite about it, or
Mm,
like you might say something that's not meant for deep discussion or something like that. But then it turns into something which is permanent. And Twitter, I guess, is a permanent record now in some
yeah.
ways. But I do think that the idea that you could not edit anything was
Mm,
important about it, right? Because it
yeah.
meant that if you what you are putting out there is what you have said, and you cannot
Mm,
change it, right? And
yeah.
I'm worried about some of this stuff, right? Like, because especially really popular Twitter accounts, like you see Donald Trump
Mm,
when he was on Twitter before he went
yeah.
to
Whenever
whatever this
whenever
thing.
he went to the loo, basically,
Well, yeah,
when he was
exactly,
on.
right? No, but
Yeah.
well, I mean, like, but you look at popular accounts like that. I mean, like, you look at our prime minister's account. You look at, even big actors or big NBA players or stuff like that, right? And the second they tweet something, the reactions are fast and furious,
Yeah.
right? And so, like, and so they're saying that it's going to be a 30-minute edit button,
Mm, yeah.
right? And that they
Which I think is a smart way to do it, because I feel the bigger problem here is this, right? You put an entire tweet out, you don't realize there's one typo there and you can't edit it. I feel 30 minutes is the right kind of compromise. I would actually make it shorter. I'd make like a 15-minute,
I
10
would
minute.
make it I would make it 30 seconds.
Ah,
I
that's
would
way too much.
honestly.
Five
No, because
minutes.
no, because see, so here's the thing, right? Varun, if you ever look at like a really really big follower account, right, like somebody like
Mm,
Kevin Durant, or you look at
mm,
these political controversial political figures,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
They can say something, and if they can edit it for 30 minutes, they would have had in those 30 minutes probably hundreds of reactions to what they've said. They
Hmm.
might change what they say.
Yeah.
You know,
That's actually an interesting point. How would you kind of look at retweets if you have retweeted something? If I, it's
yeah,
literally me saying I like apples, and you suddenly change that to I like oranges, but everybody who likes
correct.
apples has retweeted that, and
Yeah.
um, that's actually an interesting point. I mean, do you show the fact that,
So
or do you get a
they say that,
notification saying someone has edited what you retweeted has been edited, so it's not a retweet anymore?
I
I
don't
mean, I guess the
know, right?
logistics of that is a lot more.
That's one of the reasons why it's been so complicated for them as well, right? It's not so easy, but I do think that, if you make a mistake, that's the price you pay. Delete it and rewrite it. Yeah,
Yeah,
you lose your engagement, but you made a mistake. You shouldn't have made the
yeah,
mistake, right? I mean, like, pay
yeah,
a little bit of attention before you do it. I
yeah.
kind of, I mean, like, I understand why they are on that. I would be okay with, like, a 30-second or a 1 minute
Hmm.
edit button, right? Because that just is like, if you make a typo, you push something, you see it immediately, like, oh shit, I spelled speed like SOEED instead of SPEED, right?
Yeah,
You
yeah,
just go in and you just like quickly change that, and that's, that fine. But
yeah,
giving people 30 minutes of engagement, especially on high traffic accounts, that's basically you're giving them like first pass, and most of the engagement will happen post 30 seconds, right? But you're giving them like a focus group to kind of focus out their tweet first,
yeah,
and then they can change it a little bit, right?
yeah, yeah. But yeah, and I guess we'll see how it plays out. They'll test it for a
Yeah,
while. You never know. With Twitter, they test too many things. You never know what sticks, what stays,
true.
what goes. But
Yeah,
what is kind of sticking?
you sent me that message the other day about how Twitter is taking podcasts seriously, and my response
Yes.
to you was
Yes. So I messaged
the
Amit the
height
other
of
day for all the
cynicism.
listeners and saying Twitter's taking podcast seriously. And his response to me is, I've heard everybody talking about they're taking podcast seriously for the last decade now. I'm still waiting to see who that is.
It's
What was your
cyclical, right?
response?
It's very cyclical, right? It depends on basically if you don't have a new product announcement, hey, let's talk about podcasting.
Yeah. Yeah.
It really does feel like that, at least from the majors, the YouTube, the Facebook, the Twitter,
Yeah.
Google Music, Google App, just everybody. It feels like that.
Everybody's on podcast. On the other front,
Everybody's
India's overtaken the UK to become the fifth largest economy. I mean, this has been in the offing for a bit, but it's
yeah,
interesting if you look at the colonial context of this. Is I think
exactly.
most.
We
Yeah,
would have been much larger if they hadn't stolen all the shit, right? So yeah, of
that's
course,
true.
it is amazing.
That is true. That is true. And you actually bought this next story out, which is basically Reliance bought Campa Cola, which is
I
super
love that.
interesting. And also for like young listeners who don't know what Campa Cola is, Campa Cola was the OG cola way
So,
back in the
so
day, even before Thumbs Up, right?
so it had a history, right? So basically, what happened is that when in the during the emergency or a little before emergency, when Indira Gandhi and George Fernandez was very active at that point in time, the Coke was kicked out of India, right? At one point in
Hmm.
time,
Hmm.
Coca-Cola, and so then Campa
Yeah.
Cola was kind of made by this guy who had supposedly, who knows, but supposedly had like good government contacts and stuff like that, and he
Hmm.
became the Campa Cola guy. And then
Wasn't he the guy who used to manufacture Coca-Cola for Coke and then
I
started to
think
do this, something like that? I'm not sure.
I think he might have been the bottling guy, not the
Yeah. Yeah.
manufacturing guy. Like, they have like a whole bunch of different processes, right? I think he might have been the bottling guy.
Hmm.
But
Super interesting. And it's also interesting that Reliance is doing this because Reliance is making moves into FMCG in a strong way.
yeah,
They spoke about that in their what is that, the shareholders meeting amongst all the other
the
announcements.
AGM.
This
Yeah,
is super interesting for them to kind of go into that because with the skill which they kind of moving out there and that whole WhatsApp piece that we recently locked could be an interesting move for them to get into the cola space because we all feel
I don't.
colas are gone, but cola is still very much around. People still drink a lot of it.
Here we go.
Yes, point me
This is
noted.
not.
Amit
This is
Doshi is
not
holding up
cola.
a glass of
It's not
cola.
cola. It looks like cola, but it's not cola. But I
Okay,
thought
fair enough.
but I generally do have a Diet Coke with me. So I mean, like, it's kind of in the. This is representational of that. This is coffee.
Okay.
But uh, no, but I mean, like, but you were mentioning all the moves that they're making into these retail
Hmm.
spaces and stuff like that, right? And I think like one of the interesting things about this Campa Cola acquisition, if you will, is they have this brand called Ye Cola or Ya Cola, YEAH, yeah, however you want to say that, right? Ya Cola, Ye Cola. So they have this cola brand, which is sitting in all of the Reliance grocery stores and is taking
Hmm.
shelf space. And in these grocery store shelf spaces, like for if you're a D2C brand or if you're an N brand, right? Shelf space is one of the most important things you can imagine, right? And so
Yeah.
they have these homemade brands which are doing this. Instead, now you flip that to Campa Cola, and I think you got something really interesting there. And Campa
Mm.
Cola had all of them, right? They had Campa Orange and they had Campa Lime, and it would be really interesting to me to see, like, how much this comes back.
Yeah. And let's look at what else is there. Okay, I
What
have a
else would?
point to make here.
Yes.
Can we stop getting excited about every time an Indian becomes the CEO for a global company? Like I know it's great. Lakshman Narasimhan is the new CEO for Starbucks. He was the CEO for Reckitt before this. Reckitt is like a
Yeah.
global FMCG conglomerate. So I don't get this excitement of saying, wow, one more Indian has become. I'm like, because most Indians studied here, went to the US to do engineering or MBA, and then
Mm.
went up the corporate ladder and became what they became. Not
Yep.
taking away from their achievement, but I'm like, can we stop making this a like dole pitoing scenario?
I mean, like, I would say this also. Also, people who don't live here anymore, they don't really think of themselves as Indian themselves.
Hmm.
Many of them don't, right? I mean, like, I can see this in, like, big parts of my family, right, where they think of themselves as Indian American. They don't think of themselves as Indian at all,
Yeah. They
right?
had the
So I mean,
cultural
like,
context, but not necessarily the country wise or the national
I feel like
context.
I feel like that also, evaporates as you go from, like, first generation to second generation to third
Hmm.
generation, right?
True. True.
Because now at this point, my family, we're starting to see the third generation grow up over there,
Yeah.
right? And the I have a niece. She is now 23 or 24 years old. In her entire life, as far as I know, she's been to India twice,
Hmm.
right? And
Hmm.
so
Yeah.
there's no real deep, like, I mean, like, she's into the movies, and she's musical, so she likes the songs and all that,
Yeah.
but she's not really
This is just
uh
great fodder for one more LinkedIn post, which we'll also talk about later in the show,
okay.
or one
Really,
more
how,
tweet.
dude, you've become an expert at LinkedIn post, man, because I don't know how what I just said is a LinkedIn post, but all right, cool,
What you've
dude.
just said is a LinkedIn post. Everything is a LinkedIn post or a tweet. Um, it can be made into a carousel. Many things that can be done from these things. Five
uh,
reasons why. Anyway, I'm not even getting into that. But there's actually one more story in our introduction which I think might be a good kind of deep dive into, um, which is the whole geo and Facebook and the Meta thing. But I feel
yeah.
like we should kind of pick that up right after a break because Jalasmi told us that we were doing a very long introduction, and people don't seem to
Ooh,
like long introductions these days.
I didn't even
So
realize we were doing the introduction. I thought we were in the show.
this is the introduction. We always do long. We actually recently did an episode which was the longest introduction ever because it was the entire episode, and and we actually had someone write in and say, guys, this long introduction doesn't work. So to that person who tweeted to us, this introduction ends here, and we come back after this break on Think Fast.
Hello, hello, hello. It's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On the 800th episode of The Habit Coach, Ashton is joined by Lilia Sabathier, a trauma expert and a healing mentor. They talk about what constitutes trauma and how to navigate it healthily. On Varta Lab, Akash and Naveen are joined by MC and designer Vishal Raskina. They share many interesting wedding stories on this laugh ride of an episode. On Ek Chuski Finance, Priyanka enlists 3 ways which will help women get over their fear of investing in the stock market. On This Round is on Me, Gauri is joined by Kalpesh Parmar, Country General Manager for Mars Wrigley. They talk about the impact of the pandemic and the overall growth strategies of Mars Wrigley. On Storytellers and Storysellers, Vineet chats with playwright, director, and actor Faiza Jalali, who gives us a peep into the world of performing arts in Mumbai. Once again, I'd like to remind you all about our merch store. Go check it out on the website, ivmpodcast.com. There's a tab for a shop. Click that and it'll take you to our store. Also, do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Please do spread the word about the show. That really, really does help us. And finally, do remember, rate us or review us wherever you are listening. And that could also be YouTube. We have a number of channels on YouTube where you can go and check out our shows. You can go and find those channels on ivmpodcast.com/YouTube. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors this week, HDFC Mutual Fund, TransUnion Civil, SBI Life Insurance, Checkpoint Software, and Smallcase. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Welcome back to Think Fast, where it's no longer the introduction, but it's a continuation of a story that was supposed to be a part of the introduction. Suchita's hanging with Trump and drinking some mimosas, or as he would kind of call it, Aperol Spitz, because he makes everything orange. That did not make any sense, but I will just
No, I did
continue
not.
with that. But I actually thought the Geo platform story is an interesting one to talk about, right?
I agree.
Geo partnering with Meta, so you can shop on WhatsApp. Amit, I don't know if you managed to read that story, but what do you think about the fact that you can buy stuff from Geo off WhatsApp? It seems like a very smart idea.
I think it's a very smart idea. Also, I think the biggest loser in UPI in
Hmm.
India has been
Hmm.
WhatsApp.
Hmm.
Like
True.
so far, right? I mean, I think there's a UPI story as
Yeah,
well
nobody
about
uses
like
WhatsApp Pay.
yeah, but UPI, WhatsApp, it should have been our default. How do I make a payment to somebody? We're
Hmm.
connected to everybody via WhatsApp. Tell me who you're not, who you're connected to, who you're not connected to via WhatsApp.
No
There's
one.
like I have nobody. I
Those
well, like
four people who chose to be on Telegram or Signal are
yeah. So I mean, like honestly, are you sending those four people any money?
not really.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Right, but or are they sending it? Probably no. So I mean, like I mean, like this might be like plus plus for both, right? In the
Hmm.
sense of for Geo, it is it's access to ordering from literally like there are 700 million smartphone users in India. I'm guessing smartphone users first and second apps are WhatsApp and YouTube, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there are 700 million people who can now buy your stuff via WhatsApp in a hopefully easy to do way, right?
Hmm.
And from Facebook's perspective, I think if I understood this integration correctly, payments would happen through WhatsApp payments,
Yeah.
right? And if payment is happening through WhatsApp payments, now all of a sudden you got all people's bank accounts connected to their WhatsApps. Now you might start being able to make some inroads into phone pay and Google Pay when it comes to P2P payments as well.
Yeah, and what I feel it also kind of gives it's a win-win on both sides. That obviously Meta did invest into Reliance at a certain point of
Platforms,
time,
yeah.
um, and I feel what this does is it helps both. It gives Reliance the distribution immediately can reach out.
Mhm.
You have something you already have. You don't have to download
Yeah.
something new. Plus, you can shop on this. It's a great way to kind of bring that partnership together.
Mhm.
Also makes it very convenient for the consumer, right? I mean,
Yeah.
wouldn't you rather order stuff on WhatsApp than have to go to another app or do something else? Um,
That's that's a tricky question, right? I mean, like the super app is something that people have been talking about for years, right? And I think the only somewhat successful implementation of that is WeChat in China, right?
yeah.
I don't think that besides that, well, maybe Grab in Singapore now to some degree could be considered a super app, right?
That's true.
But
That's true.
I think that it's been a hard road to kind of crack the super app, right? WhatsApp is really was, or at least I thought was really well positioned to be that in India to a great degree, right? But it just feels to me like the rollout on everything was really, really slow.
Yeah. Jalasmi brings up a good point. Like Tata New, which came up with all that fanfare about being the super app, just like, and no one talks about it. Like, I haven't used it.
Yeah,
I don't know if you have. I still
I
use the
don't.
individual apps of whichever Tata ones which I use. I still use their
Yeah.
individual apps because they never
So
shut those down, which I think which I thought was smart, or maybe
yeah.
wasn't. I don't know.
Well, no, I mean, like, the thing is that it's difficult. The way I think app updates work, right? It's difficult to move from one app to the other app because you got to then maintain multiple. Each Play Store listing or App Store listing has a crypto certificate associated with it, right? And
Hmm.
so if you are, so you cannot move. You can't like go like there are three apps and now we're going to all be the same app. You have to then maintain simultaneous releases. I think on all, if I'm not mistaken, I think that's how that works. I
Hmm.
could be wrong about that, but I think that's how that works. Difficult to kind of shutter those apps, right? Completely.
Yeah. But do you see
I
this
think
kind of playing out in a way? Because people have also, I feel that, do you feel it's late in some
Mhm.
ways? I mean, this could have happened a little earlier because people already are using Dunzos. Or the number of quick commerce, delivery, all those apps which are already there. I feel what Geo will kind of give is that deep discount which they always give because they do the long play. But people have also gotten more comfortable using a lot of this. So maybe the play might not be metro focused and be a little wider in that sense, maybe.
my this is right that Varun. My personal opinion on this, right, is I think that you and I are not typical in some ways. We find an experience we are comfortable with and we use that. Like I was
Mm,
talking to the team in the office the other day, right, about Swiggy
mm,
and Zomato and who uses what, right? And
mm,
I
mm,
default to Swiggy because Swiggy for me is a more comfortable experience, right?
mm,
It just I like the fact that they have a Swiggy One product which lets me eliminate my delivery fees. Most of the restaurants that I want are on Swiggy. But then I was talking to everybody, and they are much more price sensitive. And so they
mm,
will look up, they will set up the order on both platforms if the restaurant's available on both platforms,
mm,
and see whichever is cheaper and order accordingly.
mm.
Right now, Reliance has the benefit of scale,
Yeah,
which very few other companies can compete with,
yeah,
right?
very few.
And so, given that, I feel like the vast majority of the audience, and this goes across income classes, right? I mean, I was talking to a cousin of mine who is far, 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 far wealthier than me, right? I mean,
Mm,
like, it's not even close, right? I mean, like, and yeah, she was talking she was basically giving me shit because I was not ordering diet coke and stuff like that from Big Basket, because Big Basket is now giving diet coke at like a 10% discount or something like that.
mm,
You know what I mean? I'm just like, no, we get this diet coke from the store and they send it and it's easy, right? And she's like, no, 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 you
mm,
should be. And I'm like, I'm being told to buy not from the local kirana
yeah,
store, but instead
yeah,
go to Big Basket and get it, right? I'm being
yeah,
told this by my cousin who is
yeah.
12 years older than me, who I basically taught how to use email. She is telling
Yeah.
me that I should be going to Big Basket first.
Because consumer behavior has changed, and I feel that the cost factor, what you said, is so important because, like, I ordered something on Dunzo the other day, and it comes much faster than me calling the local vegetable
Yeah.
guy. And the first question from my cook was, "What's the cost?" And but she saw the quality as well. I feel it's that, right? Suddenly you see the quality of the vegetable that kind of comes in
Mhm.
plus the cost, and they gauge it. And I feel a lot of us don't end up gauging it because it's almost like, okay, let's order it and move on. But I
Yeah.
feel a large part of the country is going to look at you saying, "Okay, you give me quality at the lowest price." I mean, that could be the big game changer here. But moving
What
on
was
from, sorry, what was
what
saying?
was sorry, what was the there was this app, right, for which is still very popular. You can set up your next morning grocery deliveries in it, right? So it's not a 10-minute
Hmm.
service app, but what it does is that, yeah, in the evening you say, okay, send me 1.5 liters of milk, send me six I don't know if they do
That's
veg
called me
non-veg, but
WhatsApping
six
my Kirana store guy.
that's exactly what it is, right? But I think it's called Supra Daily or Super Daily or something up like that.
I haven't come across it.
But the idea is that basically you go in there,
Super
you get a
daily.
Super Daily, you get a great rate for it.
Hmm.
It's really really inexpensive, and you set it up. So the 10-minute service thing that you're talking about, right? That's a
Hmm.
value to me. That's a value to you. That's a value to me. I don't care about 10 minutes, but 30 minutes is great for me.
Yeah, yeah.
But again, most people are so price sensitive, right? That they are okay with ordering the day before for the next day because that much planning they can do.
Which is why Big Basket does well, which is why
Yeah,
they do well. Yeah, for
yeah,
that specific reason.
yeah.
And speaking of doing well, which is my general segue to go from line to
Nice
line
segue.
in this thing,
Nice
which,
segue.
which for some reason Suchita does
Well
not like
done.
me segueing. See, someone at least is liking my
Hey,
segues.
a smooth segue makes for a smooth show.
Yes. Speaking of segues, you read the Cloud Kitchen story, which I think is super
Yes.
interesting and makes sense. So, for listeners, in a nutshell, there was this bunch of tweets and stories that kind of came out about this, where basically 200 different, in brackets, fake restaurant brands were delivered from one single Cloud Kitchen in Bangalore.
Uh-huh.
Because basically you need a license to operate the kitchen, but you can run as many entities as brands of that on Swiggy or Zomato. So technically, it's legal. And someone called Prashant Baid on Twitter kind of put this one out, put the entire database out there. And I think it's interesting because there also are many others like this, right? I mean, there's
Yep.
obviously Rebel Foods, which is the biggest player there, but they start this whole conversation around, okay, one second, is this the way it should be, etc. I mean, I have a perspective on it, but I want to get your POV first, Amit.
No, so I mean, like the way I see this, right, is that we like all things in life, right, there needs to be a balance, I guess, of some nature,
Mm.
right? Because what this guy is describing, running 200 brands out of two small
Two
300
small
square
kitchens,
feet
yeah.
kitchens is a little troublesome. You know what
The
I
most
mean?
interesting
That's
part, I don't know if you read this part, is that a lot of the names of the restaurants are similar to popular names. It's like your Nike and
correct.
Nikki format. Like you have
Yeah,
like mainland China or like main China or
mainline
like whatever.
China.
Like
Yeah.
I had a very bad one, which would have been too non-veg for this podcast. But let's just not. I don't know if I
All
would
right.
order from that place as well. I will just let that one go. Um,
No, so
but yeah,
yeah, no, sorry. That's right. There is a balance to be struck here, right? Like, so, I'd been hearing about this for a while, right? Like, so, one of the ideas so what is a cloud kitchen, right? A cloud kitchen is essentially a kitchen which allows you to service without the front desk, without the seating, without the
yeah,
this. It's a delivery only restaurant, if you will, right?
yeah.
And so, if it's a delivery only restaurant, then where is the so I mean, like, what is the harm in some ways if they are operating multiple, right? So I was looking into this as so this is a big business in some ways as well, right? This is what this guy is doing. The founder of Uber, Travis Kalanick,
Mhm,
his new business is to establish cloud kitchens in different parts of the country in the US, right? That's what he's
mm,
doing right now. And I think it's a really fascinating business because you can run a lot of the requirements, especially the capital intensive requirements, right? Heavy duty electricity generators, refrigeration, big cooking units. All this stuff is like capital intensive, can be used for multiple different formats. It doesn't mean that you don't use different fryers
mm,
for a hamburger restaurant and a steak restaurant and a
mm,
pakoda restaurant, right? All of them use the same kind of fryer at the end of the day, right? So
mm,
the replication or the efficiency that you can get makes a lot of sense.
yeah,
This sounds like a clear abuse. I think one of the interesting things is something like Chuck E. Cheese, right? So
yeah,
Chuck E. Cheese is a very down market restaurant in the US, like very down
yeah.
market, right? It's a go and get all you can eat pizza and salad and stuff like that for $5, and it's basically a place where people take their kids are playing video games, and there's like ball pits and all that kind of stuff. Their pizza, so basically what they started doing is that they created a new brand called Pascali's, which is based on one of the so Chuck E. Cheese's mascot, I think, is a mouse, but and
Mm,
the mouse's name is Pascali, right?
okay.
And so they created a new brand called Pascali's, and they kind of presented it as upmarket pizza and
Mm.
for delivery only. And yeah, I mean, like, it did well for them. So I mean, like, it's a good way to
But
kind
if you
of
read
create.
this, but I think see that's a legit way to do it also, right? You figure where once again I have a lower end brand, I have a higher end brand, kind of break
Yeah.
this up, use the same thought process. But here, if you read this story, it's super like I mean it gets shadier as you kind of go
Yeah.
because unlike a Rebel Foods, let's be honest, Rebel Foods is a great model because you have Fasos, Beros,
Yeah.
Biryani, Oven Story, so many all from the same kitchen, same
Hmm.
location, but it's kind of it's been built to kind of function like an entire industrialized setup, right? A lot of
Right.
this stuff is robotics driven, which I find super interesting because for people who don't know, a lot of the biryanis you might get from some of these are actually put together by robots who know exactly how much you kind of put in, like that one piece of aloo, this much rice, this much chicken. It all gets put together in a almost a machine driven system.
Yeah.
But this place, basically, the writer found that a lot of the cloud kitchens he kind of got like food is terrible. So he went there, and the only way to find the location was to check the FSSAI license number and kind of track where it was. And that's how he found that they were all from the same kitchen. He went there. He said like a one location, 189 restaurants. Then he went deeper and he found the name thing which I spoke about earlier. But
Yeah.
they were almost like duping people, right? You want to go for mainland China, but you getting something which is slightly like the spelling is slightly off, so you order from there by
I'm still
mistake.
not understanding what your this was though. I still can't fit you. I still can't figure out your non-veg joke. I'm trying to, but I just can't.
I mean, what?
Oh, rhymes with China.
Yes,
Gotcha.
yeah.
It took me a while.
But if you go down this, there was one guy who had this license, which is the guy called Ramjani Khan, and this one person is running 400 different restaurants with two tiny kitchens. So
Yeah.
it's not 200, 201 locations. So it's 400 in total, and they none of and all have like base level cuisines. It's like
Yeah.
your Chinese, Indian, everything else. So nothing like it suddenly hasn't gone like Italian or like specialized. But it's crazy because there has to be some form of regulation at some point to say, if you are doing this cloud kitchen, how many can you operate from a kitchen? How many can you, like, there has to be some health standards, which I know is a tricky one in the restaurant space oftentimes. But I think that's the only way to kind of sort this one out.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like, I think there needs to be some sort of there needs to be, like, I mean, so also, I mean, like, honestly, Swiggy and Zomato are the aggregators in this case, right? They do have a responsibility to ensure that there is some degree of quality control on the restaurants that they are putting into into their apps, right? I would I generally think that Swiggy and Zomato get pulled into a whole bunch of things which aren't their fault, right? The restaurant sends the wrong food. How is that Swiggy's fault? Swiggy's not supposed to open the package, right? Or
Yeah.
Zomato's not supposed to open the package and check what's inside. The restaurant sends the wrong food. It's the restaurant's fault. But
Yeah.
people drag Swiggy and Zomato into it, like, all the time in public stories, right? I don't think
Yeah.
that's their fault. But in this case, I feel like, I expect a certain amount of quality control at their end before they sign a
Mm.
restaurant up.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I agree on that front because
Yeah.
at some point, if it's on the platform, you got to at least say, okay, if they, I mean, they would also know that if they're picking it up from the same location for everything. It's like
Yeah.
it's very clearly in their database, so they should be able to
Well,
track that. If so many restaurants are coming from one location, they have to have almost like a manual check of sorts, at least.
no,
If
no, they
not,
have in big cities they have area reps, right? I mean, like, they have
yeah.
people who work with the restaurant. So there is a dude who has worked with this person who knows that there are 200 restaurants operating. There is a dude in Swiggy and
I have a
Zomato who
question:
knows
is
this.
that dude the guy who's running the 200 restaurants?
It very well could be.
It could be.
Very well could
I'm
be.
not putting that past. There is a family member. There's a cousin who is
Yeah.
actually running that whole thing. I'm not saying
101%,
this is me
101%. We
giving
don't know,
fake
but you
news.
don't know. But I mean, like, given the way that India operates, would that surprise you?
No, I don't think it would surprise me at all.
Would not
That
surprise
would
me
be
either.
like legit, like first thought process jugad, which anybody would think of. Which is, I think there's a broader regulation beyond. I feel the platforms, but I agree with you. It has to start with the platforms, but I feel at some point we have to kind of have certain rules that only X amount of things can happen out of one kitchen and stuff like that.
Mm.
But who's going to push that through is a whole different point. But again, we have been told it's time to go for a break. Jalasmi is keeping track of how much time we are spending yapping away while Suchita is continuing to have Aperol Spitz. Now I hear that Joe Biden has gone with ice cream as well, as I have been told. Uh, God save America. But we shall be back after another break on Think Fast. Welcome back to Think Fast, where Amit has a clarification to
a,
give.
a correction to be made. I
Correction.
mean, like, we're serious journalists and all that, right? Of course, so we must make sure that we retract our mistakes. But apparently, Pascali is not the name of the mouse, but it is the name of the mouse is Charles Entertainment Cheese. But Pascali is associated with Chuck E. Cheese in some way. I know that it's kind of derived from that.
Hmm. And now we move on to the topic which Amit is sick of people talking about. One more platform talking about how podcasts are their thing. But I think this one is the most interesting one because I think this is a
It
legit.
is.
Is YouTube finally launched their podcast hub in the States? They're testing out a specific destination on the YouTube platform, which is for podcasts. And I think I mean, it's actually needed for the podcast space.
Yeah.
And there's something I discovered yesterday on Spotify, which I want to talk about as well. But first thoughts on YouTube finally going into this.
So the way that they're going into it, I think, is really interesting, right? One of the things that we've realized over the last year, right, is that YouTube is so for us, video is still not as large as audio is from a consumption perspective, but YouTube is the single largest platform, right?
Mm,
It's more consumption happens on YouTube than Apple Podcasts at this point in time for us, or Spotify, or Ghana, or Savan, or, I mean, like, different shows have different this, right? But just overall, YouTube is quickly becoming the number one platform on most of these shows. So, given that, I think there is a lot of consumption that is happening over there. I think YouTube is recognizing this as well, right? Like, I think one of the challenges that YouTube has as a like I mean, like, listen, YouTube's a juggernaut, so I mean, like, their challenges are
yeah,
different kinds of challenges, right? But one of the challenges I
mm,
think they saw was so much short form content being created, right? And short form
yeah,
content means that you need to get the next piece of content in front of somebody. Now,
yeah,
while that might increase overall view numbers, right? Like, because if in 5 minutes I'm seeing three pieces of content, that's three views. but the amount of long engagement that people had on the platform was less, right? So
Mm.
now what we're seeing that they are trying to push people towards longer form content, and you're seeing longer
Yeah.
form content in the algorithm a lot more. So I
Yeah.
think it's interesting. I think that what I find really interesting is that they are going to start importing RSS feeds. That
Mm.
was the thing which I find really, really interesting, right? Because
Mm.
then that means, but I wonder how is that going to play out, right? Is that going to play out as like the fake videos that we are currently doing on YouTube? By fake video, I mean images with the audio playing underneath that, right? We have a channel which does that for all of our shows.
Yeah.
But is that what we're going to be seeing over there,
Do you
or
feel
are
there's a
we
way to transition out of the RSS feed for podcasts? Because podcasts, I mean, traditionally always ran off an RSS feed, or do you think it's
right?
some form of upgradation from there needs to happen? Because looking at how platforms are doing stuff now, with I think some subscriptions happening on many ends, in some cases, video becoming a prime front and center piece. Is it time to kind of move beyond RSS feed? Is there a better
It's
alternative?
I don't know that there is, right? I mean, like, at least I'm sure, listen, I'm sure there is, right? But again, I
Mm.
don't know. The thing about standards is standards are hard to get people to agree on,
Mm.
right? And I mean, like the RSS feed standard when it comes to podcasting has been essentially updated once in the last 20 years,
Mm.
right? Because there are so many, I mean, like these standards get developed at I think a body called the W3C, and
Mm.
there are extremely passionate debates about like what should and should not be included.
Mm.
And so, if you want to look at standards, I think standards is really really difficult, right? To kind of
Mm.
get a bunch of people to look at. Standards are just hard, right, to get people to
Yeah.
agree to. So to try and get a new standard in place, right, would be very, very difficult. Can we enhance the existing standard, right? Can
Yeah.
RSS become more friendly with another 10-year-old standard called Pub Sub Hub? Is something
Mm.
which I think would be very, very useful, right? But it's currently not as this, right? So basically, PubSub Hub is it's a standard which allows for immediate updation of that there is something new here,
Okay.
right? I'll give you an example. Yesterday, I wanted to listen to. I saw an Instagram post by a podcast guy who I like, and he said,
Mm.
"Hey, new podcast is up now." I didn't see it in my feed on my app
Mm.
for another 40 minutes, right?
Mm.
So the instantaneous thing would be useful. A way to track listen numbers would be useful.
Mm.
Sorry, this is getting really technical as well, right? But I mean, like,
Yeah.
I was at a conference thing where NPR had proposed a addition to the standard, which would allow for us to be able to tell how much of a podcast is being consumed, right?
Which is so
Uh,
important, right?
it is, but it was a non-starter with a lot of the people who are really big in the space, right? They're like, no, absolutely not. We are not. We want. The thing is that by doing this, you're adding so much complexity into the RSS feed, right?
Mm.
The way to do this was by creating like a whole bunch of hyperlinks that existed within like an extra field on the
Okay.
RSS, which is based on time and stuff like that. And the people who are, the primary hosting people for the podcasting space were absolutely against this idea, as
Mm.
were the people who control a lot of the big apps in the space, right?
Yeah.
So it's difficult, right, to kind of do this. So that's why I think YouTube is interesting, because what happens with YouTube is if YouTube starts importing via RSS, and YouTube, like Spotify, so both of them have the ability to import via RSS, but then uh, host the content themselves and then
Yeah.
be able to provide a more seamless consumption experience,
Yeah. And also,
right?
I feel
So
that
basically,
what they're because even Spotify is moving quickly towards video, right? We're seeing a lot more podcasts slowly adding video onto it. When I was actually in London, weirdly, my anchor opened up and gave me the option to upload video as well. So I was kind of trying to test that out and see if it could happen. Although when I came back to India, it didn't work again. And I think that's really the play. Like most podcasts now are dual. They're moving towards the scene of having a video version as well, and no one does video and monetization and discoverability on video better than YouTube
y-
does.
yeah,
While
agreed.
Spotify, by the way, a quick thing to add, yesterday I noticed something that now you can go into a podcast and search within the podcast. So if I go to a show and on top I can searching, okay, search for one word, like let's say I'm
Huh.
searching for um creator economy in a show. If it shows up in the title or in the text, those episodes show up. so people can search within the list of episodes. So Spotify also obviously been working on discoverability, but I feel
Sure.
that these two are going to clash at some point
I
in
don't
a
think this
big
is
way.
new. I don't think this is new. I think the feature you're describing right now, I
Yeah.
think has been there for a while. Because
Really?
I do
I just
that quite.
noticed it yesterday.
No, so I've done that a few times, right? Because if I see something on an Amazon Prime or a Netflix that I've really enjoyed, then typically try and look for podcasts around that, and so then I'll
No,
search
not
for
just the
that.
podcast. I'm talking about you go to a show. Let's say you
No, so
hypothetically go to Think Fast, and you want to find an episode where we've spoken about the creator economy.
mhm.
So you go to the show page and you search for creator economy, and you get all the episodes which are featured that.
So are you talking? Do the words need to be inside the description, or are they pulling it from inside the podcast? Are they
Description and
doing?
title, from what I can gather.
So description and title is straightforward. That's been there from a long time, right?
Hmm.
If it is pulling from inside the content, right, which is something that Google Podcast has attempted to do in
Oh,
the
really?
past. Yeah, but there has been some see, again, like I said, people fight on this shit, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people had really big issues with the fact that Google would start indexing the entire content. I
Hmm.
know that the BBC was really adamantly against this idea,
Hmm.
that Google would basically do a voice to text on the entire podcast content and then create an index of that so that you could get like deep search inside. But the
Yeah.
BBC was aghast at the idea that Google would dare to transcribe their podcasts.
Hmm.
Not just the BBC, other people were as well, right? But I remember the BBC was very outspoken about this. So
Hmm.
their content was not on Google Podcasts for a very long time.
So I feel at some point all of these things are going to merge, but I think it'll be good for consumers and creators in general because you have YouTube taking this seriously. You're not just stuck to audio streaming platforms as well,
Mhm.
and it's a I guess a win-win for the creators and a win-win for consumers. For the platforms and the larger space, you got to see how this evolves and how audio plays out.
All right.
But beyond that, we need to take
I
another break.
Yeah, let's do it.
I'm feeling very sad at this point in time. I will use an AR filter and and come back and we'll be back on Think Fast. Welcome back to Think Fast, where we have just heard that Suchita is standing on top of the Empire State Building saying, why is this Empire State Building not registered on LBB? But nevertheless, oh man, she's going to give me so much shit about all this stuff that I said. She's like, dude, those are not even jokes. They're not even funny. I don't like your jokes. I don't like you. So that's going to anyway. Moving on from that, there's been a lot of chat, and we spoke about this in the introduction, right? Around quiet quitting, which is the
Uh,
saying that the trend of what's kind of been going on. It's this whole notion that you know the rejecting that work has taken over lives, and people need to go above and beyond to
mhm.
what their job descriptions are. And there's been a lot of conversation around that. There also parallelly been some I would say some maybe not so thought through posts on LinkedIn for certain founders and CEOs, which have kind of also gotten backlashes in the recent past. But in
Mhm.
general, I mean, what base level thoughts on the quiet quitting trend?
So this is what I would say, right? That I mean, if there, I mean, like, yeah, it is very possible that you can just do like so. What they're talking about with
Do
quitting,
your
right,
base
is
level. Don't have to go above and beyond
just
your
to
job.
not even that, just do the bare minimum necessary, not
Mm,
base level also, right? I mean, like the bare
mm,
minimum necessary not to get in trouble and not get fired. Now,
yeah.
honestly, if you're that person and you're okay with doing that, I think that I don't see a problem with that, but then again, I don't think that you should have hopes of advancement.
Yeah,
You know what I
exactly. I
mean?
agree.
If you want to do that and you just want to do what's in front of you or the bare minimum possible, if the
Mm,
company has decided to pay you, if the company has decided to hire you to do a particular job and you do just that job and nothing else, so be it. I mean, like that's that's absolutely fine. But yeah, I mean, like when it comes to getting interesting projects, when it comes to getting interesting things in front of you, don't expect to be in the don't expect for that to be don't expect for that to happen. It just won't.
it's also a culture play, right?
Yeah.
I still feel we haven't figured out, and maybe the reason why people gone back to offices to a large extent, in many cases, has been this: is that you can't hold culture together digitally yet. We still
Hmm.
haven't figured the right balance for that. I mean, we were all, let's be honest, the last two odd years was us being forced into
Yeah.
finding a new way of working. It's not like it was planned. We didn't transition into it. It literally went like full stop and into an entirely different way of working. And working online allows you to do a lot more quiet quitting, if you ask me, because when you aren't in a sense with more people in the same office, you can just do what you have to do and get by.
Hmm.
But when you're in the middle of everybody, you also see the opportunities around you. There's also culture, there is
Yeah.
people, there is there is a certain human to human vibe, which in many ways people see someone else working and they would also feel, okay, maybe I need to do something with that.
Hmm.
If you're just by yourself in your house, it's much easier to kind of get into this zone of thought.
Hmm. No, so I mean, I agree with you 100%, right? I mean, like, think about it like this, right? You are a leader at your company. I'm a leader at my company, right?
Yeah,
I have an idea pop into my head that, hey, you know what, this
yeah,
might be something interesting to work on. I see, I have 8 people who work in similar positions, right, doing
mm,
similar kinds
mm,
of things for us. And I mean, like, you don't want to be capricious, right? You don't want to be kind of like, you don't want to play favorites. But at
yeah,
the same time, the people who are in front of you are the people who you are going to think about.
yeah,
That is human nature, right? I mean, like, there's no
exactly.
getting away from that, right?
Yeah,
So the opportunities are going to come up for people who are around, for people who are put their hands up for different things, right?
yeah,
For people who do kind of make sure that they come seeking feedback also, right? Yeah, it is my job as a manager to give people feedback. I understand that also. I understand that, right? But what I do realize that not everybody is comfortable seeking feedback, but giving feedback to people is one of the most important kind of things that needs to happen, right? And
yeah,
the people who come and ask for feedback are going to get it a lot more than people who I need to seek out to get feedback, because
yeah,
feedback is not more than like a 1 or 2 minute conversation. You know what I mean?
yeah,
And so if you come to me and just tell me, "Okay, hey, I've been working on this," and I'll be like, "Oh, that sounds really interesting," or, you know what, you might want to kind of keep this thing in mind, or, you know what, maybe talk to this person, they worked on this in the past. So yeah, no, so I think it's very essential to provide people with feedback, and the more you ask for it, the more you're going to get. Again, I have to give you feedback on a time to time basis. I understand that as a manager, it is your job to ensure that people are doing the best they can in all circumstances, right? But people who seek out feedback, right, are people who are going to get more of it, and more of it is helpful for you in your career.
yeah. I also have a add-on to this, which is a simple fact that in many ways, what's also happened is what we haven't spoken about enough, and I feel it needs to be, is that we have collective workforce, collective humanity went through trauma for 2 years. Let's be honest. And in many ways, it's been okay. We switched off, we put something off, we try and put it back on, and go back to how you worked before. I feel a lot of people also have lost that sense of, okay, is this what I really want to do? Is this the job I need to be doing? Does this is this even worth it? So people have gone back to work with that mindset.
Yep.
And plus, and I feel that culture plays more, and I'm going to overuse the word culture now because I feel you got to get people excited to be part of an organization, get excited for the work they're doing, what it's leading to, not just for them, but in a broader sense. And unless you're really doing that and don't act like, oh, this is exactly like how it was before the pandemic. I feel that's really one of the reasons why this has become such a big thing, is because people are kind of coming in and they're coasting because they kind of just don't feel like that. It's that internal feeling of. I mean, I know that there's an Adam Grant version which is languishing, but I would just say that it just feels meh, right? I think that's the better way to put it. And then you're like, okay, let me just go through it. Let me go through the motions, and eventually it'll come back. And I feel in other cases, people just generally don't like their jobs anymore, or don't like their jobs, and just feeling that not confronting it and not even quitting and actually finding another job, and just kind of staying there and saying it's fine, I'll just go through the motions and move on, is another reason why it's happening.
So again, I mean, there are going to be people like that, right? I mean, and this has been true for all businesses throughout the ages, right? There have always been people who are driven to and there have always been people inside a business, right, who have been driven to kind of achieve stuff, and there have always been time servers. This is not something new, right? I think what is a little new over here, right, in that sense, right, is this idea that so how do you make work enjoyable, effective for everybody? is a challenge that we are having to deal with, I think, in ways that we did not pre-pandemic, as again, as managers, right? uh,
Mm,
Before the pandemic, this was not so much of a uh, this was not something I spent that much time worrying about, right?
mm,
But now I really do spend a lot of time thinking about this, right? How do you make the office an effective place to get as much stuff done as possible? And there are no easy answers over here, because I think that our business is of the nature where it's a collaborative business. It is a business
mm.
which requires multiple people to work on a piece of content. And so I do believe in the importance of presence, but I also know that, sometimes you need quiet time to work,
Yeah.
right? And when quiet time in a office environment like ours is really tough to get, so maybe
True.
sometimes it is best for somebody to work at home for a day. So we kind of I've tried to kind of manage that, like, in the sense that make it so there's a one day work from home, one day a week work from home, but it must be pre-planned. It cannot be this. So I'll tell you the thing that annoys me the most, right, in this whole thing. The thing that annoys me the most is getting a message in the morning saying that, you know what, I think I'm going to work from home today. That annoys me, right?
Mm.
Because if you're going to work from home, plan because no, everything we do affects multiple people in this organization. If
I
you
think
are
the
somebody,
hybrid, that's the problem with hybrid, right? You either one or the other. I think that with hybrid, it's so because there are more players, I mean, more logistics in play, it becomes trickier to kind of have that, okay, last minute thing. Even if, so either you're calling from mental health days. I feel that the other aspect of this also is that, you know, either you take a mental health day. Say, okay, I'm working from home because I can't be in middle of people. You're going to have that call out, which I guess is a more health focused one. But I feel at some point you can't make a split judgment case like you said, because it impacts more and more people in that sense of the word. But the other trend, which I've found interesting, is the whole concept of quiet firing, which gives the opposite perspective. Which is basically people who are working in jobs where it feels like they're in a dead end, like that they're like there's nothing more going to happen here. I haven't been given a raise in years, because also people haven't, in many cases, many companies haven't gotten raises in years because the market's been down, companies haven't performed well in the last many years. So even that makes them feel like, one second, why do I have to give more? Because it's not like like I'm getting more out of this. I'm not seeing myself grow somewhere else. So I know it's like obviously they've taken quiet quitting and added firing to it, but I guess this gives another perspective on this whole thing.
so yeah, I hear that, but again, I think that depending on what kind of company it is, that's the idea of quiet firing is bad management too,
Yeah,
right? Like, again, it depends on what kind of company it is, right? If it is a
yeah,
company which is unionized and has like all kinds of rules against firing, then that might be the only way forward you have, right?
yeah,
But in companies like ours, which are essentially hire and fire companies, right?
yeah,
Uh, in those kinds of companies, I mean, like, you don't want to, again, like, just let somebody go for fun, right?
yeah,
But at the same time, if there is a significant issue, an issue to the point where people are being sidelined and not given interesting work, and, like, being told to do shit stuff, then
yeah,
it's just better to have a frank conversation with that person, isn't it?
yeah. And in a parallel universe, what's happening in India with what happened rather with Bombay Shaving Company's Shantanu Deshpande, and his post on how you need to kind of work 18 hours a day and hustle in your 20s, which really went sideways for him, and he's now quit LinkedIn. Uh, and there's also like another post which I think I was talking about before we started recording, which I found on LinkedIn, people are sharing around, which is again one more co-founder who's talking about how almost like interview hacks by calling people at 8 a.m. for interviews or 11 p.m. or like asking outstation candidates to kind of show up the next day to show their hustle and things like that. There's a lot of this stuff happening on the other end. Like it's almost like we have two polarized points of view of saying, one is saying you got to hustle. I know there was a creator who got into shit because he said if I were 24 hours in a day, I would ask for 25 or something like
Yeah.
that, 26. And there is on the other end, we have quiet quitting and everything else kind of happening. So if we're going into different sides of things, yes, Jalasmi, thank you for reminding that. Raj Shamani said that. Raj is going to smack me for putting this back into the pipeline. But what did you first think of what Shantanu wrote?
I'll say this, right? I mean, like, I think so I didn't read the post itself. I read
Mm,
the article about the post, right?
mm,
But I think the question I have here is, are there not different types of behaviors expected from different types of people? Dude, you started a business, you started the glitch, you guys were doing crazy shit for the longest time, right?
Yeah.
I've heard stories from you and Rohit both where, like, on set for 2 days, 3 days in a row, like without
I
leaving.
started off,
And
I was working like 15 days in a row and sleeping in the office because my office had a bunk bed and a shower.
yeah,
I've done that.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, these kinds of things happen. When I started IVM, I was working like ludicrous hours, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, like, when you're building something on the entrepreneurial part of things, right? I think that's part of what's going to happen. I don't think any of us, though, I know I didn't, I don't think you did either. I don't think I expected employees who are working with us to necessarily show the same kind of hours all the time, right?
Mm.
Yeah, maybe one day you had to do something or
No,
whatever,
but
but I
even
don't.
like go beyond the entrepreneur part, right? Even if I go back to my first ever job, which was at MTV, I would be in the office for like the entire week and not go home because I would sleep there and stuff. I would finally have someone turn to me saying, "Why haven't you gone home? Go home," right? But it was a choice I made. I
Yeah,
feel what ends up happening with, especially on social media, you write stuff in the moment, or either it's constructed or in the moment, but the nuance goes missing.
yeah,
And because the context is missing here, it feels like you're glorifying it. So the problem is this: you shouldn't glorify 18-hour work days,
okay.
but on the other end, what you should also say, it's fine to do it if it's really required and if you really want to do it, but
It's not.
not everybody has to do it.
Yeah, it's not for everyone, right? Just towards what you're saying, right? The first job I had when I came back to India was assistant director on a movie called Lavaris, right? Terrible movie,
Hmm.
but fun job, right? I mean, like, it was a really interesting job to have. And my first day there, I remember asking the producer, very nice guy, Lawrence D'Souza, continues to be active in the film industry. What are my working hours? And
Hmm.
he said, your
Yeah.
working hours are come 30 minutes before the director, leave 1 hour after the director. Those are your
Yeah.
working hours. Now,
Yeah.
that led to days when I had to be at like a Goregaon studio from town at like 7 o'clock in the morning, right? And I would have to be there till post 2, 3, 4 in the morning. Sometimes, I remember once I went to sleep in my car in the Royal Palms parking lot because next day in the morning I got done at 2:30, and next day in the morning I had to be there again at 7. I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm not driving back to my house and then coming back. I'll get 3 hours sleep. I just slept over there, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, like, these things do happen sometimes.
Yeah.
It's not, but I mean, like, it's
It
not for
shouldn't
every.
become a rule.
No, it's not.
The point is this: people kind of look at a lot of these posts and feel, okay, is this like, what was he getting as backlash? Is this the kind of culture that Bombay Shame Company has? Is this, are you? I'm like, literally, I think someone wrote to his parents saying your son's a slave driver or stuff like that, which obviously goes extremes in that sense have happened. But I feel a lot of people took out of this, and that's why I'm saying it's. I feel in social media you don't get context because it's just words. It's not. It's not. There's no nuance there. I feel what he was trying to say was that you need to put in that extra effort if you want to kind of really learn and skill in your 20s, which I agree with 100%.
I agree with
But
this.
he equated that to 18-hour work, which you quantified it. I think when you quantify it, no, that's when things go sideways, because then you're turning around and saying this is the amount of hours you have to work. It's like, I remember when that whole like 26-hour thing was happening with Raj, right? And my point was this: that I have worked like long hours. But did I have to do that every day? Should I do that every day? Not necessarily. Sometimes you have to, but you also compensate for that by making sure you have enough time to take a break after
Oh,
that.
dude,
Is the point.
what I was talking about with the director, right? The fact that I was told half an hour before and 1 hour after.
Hmm.
It's film. I don't have to go to work for 6 days in a row. Also, that also
Exactly.
happened.
Exactly.
I'm like, that was a part of it, right? I mean, like, I was 6 days. I remember I was sitting there. I remember I was able to take a 10-day holiday in Goa in the middle because we had no shoots, right? So I
And
mean, like,
which is why I think these are the stories that have to come on LinkedIn and not. I feel the problem is everything's a listicle
yeah.
or on the spur piece that's put out there. And in both cases, you're compressing it down a broader conversation into this, which is why you need to do audio posts and video posts and not text posts. Maybe more nuance in that one, because, and it's, and I've heard Shantanu, I've followed him for a while. He just started a podcast recently. I've been looking at that as well. And I feel that this is not someone who I feel is trying to propagate a change of like lifestyle. or like okay, or trying to propagate the terrible side of hustle culture. But I feel that what he missed in what he put out there is that he's saying you need to put in the effort in your early years, and only then can you scale, which is all true, because you need to put in that effort to learn, to evolve, and everything else, because your 20s are for that. But it's not at the expense of your own like balance or like mental health or just like even physical health. In that sense, I don't think that was what he meant to propagate. But again, I feel that the problem came with the 18 hours. I feel that's where it really came. I think also the tone, when you read it from your own tone of how you think he said it. Did he
Yeah.
really say it in that tone? You don't know.
I agree. This is an interesting conversation I've been having with a lot of my friends, right? Because all of us are most of my friends, right?
Mm.
And you know what? I have some friends who are professionals, and we do get into these disagreements, right, about
Yeah.
how you work, right? I mean, like I have some friends who are lawyers. I have a friend who is a doctor. Friends who work at like large corporate companies and like finance or like management kind of roles. And there isn't, but the people who are entrepreneurial generally do have a slight bent towards,
Mm.
uh, doing these nutty things. But
Yeah.
yeah, what do you do, man? I think that it's the folks who are more in the corporate professional space. They don't buy into all this stuff, right? To the
Yeah.
same degree. So
Yeah. I think this is going to be a longer conversation on that front, but I think we will leave this one for now and we'll take our final break. We'll come back with recommendations. Welcome back to Think Fast, where we have just found out Suchita has made a cap called Make America LBB Again, which does not make any sense, but it's available on LBB's website. It's going to really kill me for this one. But
so I looked at my Amazon and Netflix queue, right, in preparation for the recommendation, which I'd forgotten about the time before this when I was there with Suchita. And so Angela's me reminded me 3 times, make sure you have your recommendation today. So I was looking through my queues, and I realized that I'm in the starts of very many shows, so I don't feel confident recommending them as like they'll be ready. Like
Hmm.
there's a new trend where like we've gone back to the weekly release on OTT instead of the full
Yeah,
binge
yeah,
drop, right?
yeah.
So, but one of the shows I did watch last week or 2 weeks ago. So there's a show called The Brink on
Hmm.
Hotstar. It
Hmm.
stars Jack Black and Tim Robbins and
Hmm.
a whole bunch of Indian American actors, because the show is essentially about revolution in Pakistan happening
Okay.
and basically the diplomatic fallout from that. So Tim Robbins is the Secretary of State. Jack Black is a consular officer in Islamabad who
Hmm.
basically goes out to score weed and comes back. And when he's coming back, he basically gets caught up in a revolution and gets kidnapped or goes to. This guy is on it as well, right? Who was the Muslim correspondent from the Daily Show?
Hassan
Uh,
Minaj.
no, the other one, the one before, the older one. Uh,
I don't remember.
Damn, I can't remember his name right now, but I can see him, and I can see him. I can see his this in front of me. But the no, Mandvi, Asif Mandvi.
Okay.
Asif Mandvi, thank you, tells me. So Asif Mandvi is the other, is the Pakistani driver who is taking Jack Black around, and it's such a farcical story, right? Because it's crude, it's full
Hmm.
of like Tim Robbins is like the ultimate lech in this or show what it is. And it's a short show, 8 episodes, 30 minutes each, very short show, you can knock it out very quickly. But it's freaking hilarious, right? The Indian prime minister and this. So there was this there was like a whole thing about like misunderstanding idioms which was going on, and that nearly led to the Indian prime minister getting so pissed off. This guy's in it as well. Pablo Schreiber is in it, the guy from The
Hmm.
Wire and a whole bunch of other
Yeah.
things. Plays a
Yeah.
fighter pilot who basically wants to take an amphetamine when he is about to take off, and instead he gives himself and his co-pilot a tablet of morphine instead. So it's just absolutely insane, nutty, but really really fun.
Mine's not as fun, but it's interesting. It's this book called Build. Tony Fidel wrote a book on. He said it basically is called the Unorthodox Guide to Making Things Worth Making, and obviously Tony Fidel, guy behind the original iPhone design, etc., all that stuff. Also, then later not design, but like really work on building it in that sense. And then obviously later on went on to start off Nest. So it's a
Yeah,
very interesting one to look at from a creative perspective to really build products in that sense.
interesting.
Just started reading. Literally, I'm on like chapter 1, but it looks really cool. So I'd recommend it because I already can sense it's going to be a book which is going to be good
Uh,
to read.
Good to hear. I didn't know we could recommend books. I have a lot of book recommendations. I struggle with the video recommendations.
I am just doing any recommendation. I do many book recommendations. I've realized in the past as well. Only Suchita is this person who does not read books. Like, and actually she does. I
So,
can bitch about her because she's not on the show.
can I give a second recommendation for a book
Of
then,
course,
which I really interesting?
of
So,
course.
I've been reading a children's history of India. So
Oh,
basically,
nice.
yeah, the Indian history told as a children's book. It's on Amazon, and man, it's so fascinating to come back to this stuff because again, you studied all this in school, right? And you pick up so much stuff over the years, just in terms of general things that you're seeing,
Hmm.
or things you're hearing about, right? And now to kind of put it all together and reread this stuff has been really, really, it's been really fun.
Wow, this is super interesting. Got to buy this one.
Yeah.
Considering I have a 5-year-old at home, this has been the perfect book to buy her.
A good book to tell her the stories as well, right? I mean, like it might be a little aged out from 5 years old. I feel like it's more 8 to 10 types, like first, second
Okay.
standard types. But
Okay.
yeah, hey, he has a smart kid.
Yeah. I'm sure
Go
she'll
for
get
it.
it. She's sometimes
Yeah,
smarter than I am, which is not
I
saying
do.
much, but nevertheless. So yeah, so we've had a slightly longer episode because we've not had Trump's BFF on the show, and you have subbed in for her. Have fun,
Yeah.
Suchita. Have fun in the US. Leave that Empire State Building alone, and please do not go bothering Donald Trump or Joe Biden. Um, they're they're lovely people in many places. But I think that's it for this episode of Think Fast, guys. And we shall see you guys next week while Sujita continues to terrorize America the same way Godzilla did to Japan. Uh,
Awesome.